I've yet to see one student who is learning German and who is not overwhelmed by German grammar. I guess you're among these students just as well. And you're really faced with two alternatives that both are bad. Either you ignore grammar completely and you might be misunderstood, or at least you sound very weird when you're speaking German, or you wait 17 years until you've studied the 500-page grammar book and until you feel confident enough to order a cappuccino in Berlin. So both of these options are not really viable. And I'm suggesting a third solution here. The solution is actually to classify grammar by what is absolutely essential to start speaking and what is more of an illustration. I'm using a traffic light analogy here, so I classify grammar into red grammar, yellow grammar, and green grammar. And red grammar is really the grammar that you absolutely need in order to be understood and not to sound completely weird. And spoiler alert, it does not include dative and akkusativ, contrary to what many of the German teachers out there might be telling you. So I invite you now to look at these grammar items, go through them together with me, and these are really the things that you should memorize and should learn in order to start speaking German. The first item on my list are verbs and pronouns. Verbs are all these words that tell us what somebody does, like eat, sleep, love, hate. These are verbs. Pronouns replace persons or things. I, you, he, she, it, we, and so on. These are pronouns. And in English, just as in German, we only allow certain combinations. So for example, I have to say I sing, but she sings with an S at the end. If I say she sing, it sounds weird. In English, there are not so many different endings that we can have in a verb. Usually we have the same, like I sing, you sing, we sing. It's always sing, except with a he, she, it. But there are a few exceptions. You would say I am, but you are. You cannot say something like you am. If you do it, it sounds very weird. Or you might even misunderstand. Like you am at home. Who is at home? We have no clue. In German, these combinations are more distinct and we need to get them right, because if we don't, then really we sound a little bit weird. So I invite you to look at these combinations that we have here. Fortunately, they are completely predictable. So you would say, ich singe, du singst, sie singt, wir singen, ihr singt, sie singen. And I made a little bit of a shortcut here. You can see that I'm just showing you a woman, like she sings, but I can of course also say singt if we're talking about a guy, he. It would be the same ending. So these are the pronouns we have in German: ich, du, sie, es, and then the plural wir, ihr, sie. And you can see all the endings: an ending, st, t, n, t, and en. And this is basically how it works. And you have to memorize this really. You have to learn it by heart, just like a poem. There is not much more that you can do about it, unfortunately. But as I said, virtually all verbs, with a few tiny exceptions, follow exactly this pattern. So once you've learned it, it's safe for all. Just a few things I would like to show you that are also a bit important. We have two translations for the English you. When we talk about one person, or when we talk to one person, we say du. When we talk to several persons, we say ihr. And we use the same ending for sie, like she, and like he, and es, there is no drawing for this, which means it. I've shown you that before. Unfortunately, we also use the same ending for ihr, like the you in the plural, like two people. I'm talking to two people. Ihr singt. It's the same ending. The ihr and the they sound very similar. This is difficult in German, unfortunately, so you have to listen very carefully here. Also, we use the same word for she and for they. And here again, you can see how important the ending of the verb is, because when I say sie singt with a T ending, then it must be she, it must be one person. When I say sie singen with an N ending, then it must be several persons, and the sie would be translated as they. So unfortunately, we do a lot of recycling with pronouns here. That's just the reality of German, and therefore the verb endings are even more important. However, there are good news also. German does not have a continuous form. So there is no difference between she is singing and she sings. Whether she is singing right now or she sings regularly every Tuesday in the church choir or whatever, you have to find out about the context. There is no difference here, so you don't need to learn another form for that in German. We have a few exceptions. As I mentioned before, we have so-called strong verbs. They are basically irregular, but they are predictably irregular. You can see that the endings are exactly the same as the one that I just showed you. The only difference is that in the du form and in the er, sie, es form, so in the second and third person, the singular, we change this vowel here from sehen to siehst. Okay, and there's a number of verbs that do that, and all we basically need to know is which vowel they change to. So therefore, I always recommend to you, when you learn German verbs, always learn the infinite form. That's the form that you would find in the dictionary, and it's also the form that you would find in this wir and sie form here. And on top of it, you learn the du form. Because then you can predict, for example, here you have to sleep, schlafen, it changes the vowel to du schläfst, so it must be ich schlafe, and then it's all here, it will be this with the two dots, du schläfst, er schläft, sie schläft, es schläft, and here it goes back to normal, wir schlafen, and so on. So this is always the same system, and therefore it's absolutely sufficient for a German verb to learn the infinitive form and the second person, the du form. We have, of course, the super irregular ones. I talked about the verb to be. It's even super irregular in English. Here are the forms in German. Ich bin, du bist, er, sie, es ist. Wir sind, ihr seid, sie sind. And then we also have haben, to have. It's also a little bit irregular, not that irregular, actually. It just drops this be here in this form, so otherwise it's actually not as complicated as you might think. Before we go on to the next red grammar item, learning German is really hard work. I'm not denying that. You might have found it out by yourself. It will take time, it will take energy, and therefore I believe that the process of learning German has to be as enjoyable as possible, and that's why I've created a German course that is based on a coherent story, slightly absurd story about two sparrows in Berlin. These two sparrows here, that starts really super simply and gets more and more complicated as you improve your German. And it also teaches you a lot about German history and German culture. So if you're interested in learning German in that way, complete with explanation of the pronunciation, of the grammar, of the vocabulary, a lot of interactive exercises, check out the course. It's very accessible, it's very affordable. There is a link in the description below. Okay, this has been enough for the advertisement block. Let's go on to the next grammar item, the next red grammar item, and that is asking questions. And again, this is much easier than in English. In English, you always have this do you, don't you want to, does he need to, and so on. In German, we just start yes and no questions with the verb. Hast du Zeit? Have you time? Well, that's simple. Ist es kalt? Is it cold? Very simple. We just put the verb first and that's it, and we have a yes-no question. And when we want to ask an open question, we use a question word, of course, and all question words in German start with a W. So very convenient, very easy to memorize them. Just these two here are a bit weird. We have the verb, the word wo, which means where, and we have the word wer, which means who. So English speakers tend to mix them up. Don't do that. Apart from that, we have wie, was, warum, wann, woher, wohin, and that's it. It's so simple to ask a question. Put the question word first and continue with the rest of the sentence, and you have a question. If you want to express something that happened in the past, you're going to have to learn a past tense form. And just like in English, we have several past tense forms in German. There's a simple past and present perfect and past perfect. You don't need to learn all of them. It's not necessary, at least not at the beginning. One of them is sufficient. And if you decide which one to learn, I suggest to go for present perfect, perfect in German, because it's easier than the other ones. And in German, they are pretty interchangeable. It's mostly a regional reason whether we use the one or the other one. So it doesn't really matter which one we use. You will always be understood. And definitely under red grammar conditions, you will be understood, and there is not a big deal about which form you use. If you want something that is even simpler, then this is something I'm going to show you now. There is a hack where we learn the simple past form for just one verb, and that will be to be. And the past tense of to be, sein in German, is war. And these are the forms. Ich war, du warst, er war, sie war, es war, wir waren, ihr wart, sie waren. And you can say a lot with that, because like you were, well, somewhere, or you were sick, or you were young, or you were happy, or whatever. You can do that. Or yeah, ich war in Berlin, very simple way of saying it. There is something else you can do, which is technically not 100% correct, like ich war arbeiten. This is nothing you can write, but you can say it. And what it means is I was working. Again, grammatically, this is not 100% right, but it works with most activities, most verbs that describe an active, something active you did. Ich war arbeiten, ich war schwimmen, and so on. People will understand what you want to say. Of course, if you really want to go a little bit deeper and tell what you did during last weekend, then you should learn perfect. But to get you started, this is really a great little hack. The next item on my list are objects, and here I am actually going to sneak in these dreaded cases, Dativ, Akkusativ, a tiny little bit. You don't need to learn everything about them, but you need to learn one little bit about them. And this is very similar to English again, when you look at the difference between a subject and an object. So here in the first situation, he likes her, in the second, she likes him. Unfortunately in life, this is not always the same thing. And in English, we use different pronouns to distinguish between the two. So you don't say he likes she, and you don't say she likes he, because that would be confusing. So you have different forms for describing an object. So object here in the situation, in grammar, object is like the victim of the action that is being performed, while to be the victim of being liked is a bit weird, but I think you get the idea. And in German, these object forms are actually these here, and we call them Akkusativ. If you haven't learned about that, don't get confused about that now. You can forget about that. But if you have heard of Akkusativ before, then you know that these are the Akkusativ forms of these pronouns. So ich becomes mich, and du becomes dich, er becomes ihn. Sie doesn't change, it's the same. Es doesn't change. Wir becomes uns. Ihr becomes euch, and sie again doesn't change. So then we don't know, like in the plural again, in the singular, is it she, is it her, is it them? We don't know. We have to find out by the context. But you should learn all the other forms, because again, this sounds very weird if you use them wrong in German, or might even lead to misunderstandings. So the same example here, we would say er mag sie, but here we would say sie mag ihn. We would not say sie mag er. What you do not need to learn at this point, in my opinion, are the dative forms for the pronouns. Again, if you don't even know what that is, even better. And you also don't need to learn the object forms for other words like adjectives or articles, because in German, I can also change, or I have to change the word the in a word like he likes the dog, because the dog is the object here in the sentence. I have to change the word the in German. I would say er mag den Hund and not er mag der Hund. But that's not red grammar. That's definitely something for advanced students. If you make a mistake with this, I will still understand what you want to say. Let's go to owning things and people. Well, you don't own your kid or your spouse or whoever, but you get the idea. I want to introduce possessive pronouns in my little red grammar item list here. You should learn them also because they're super useful and they make it easy for you to explain who belongs to whom. And you can say, yeah, well, they're really simple. Mein, dein, sein, ihr, unser, euer, and ihr. And again, of course, the confusion between ihr and ihr, we don't know, like, is it her or is it there? We have to find out of the context. So you can see German likes to recycle pronouns a lot. There is also something that, depending on the gender of the person or the thing that is owned, and I'm going to talk about genders a little bit later, the ending might change. So if it's feminine, I would say deine in all these, meine, seine, ihre, and so on. And in the plural, I would also add this I. I would say deine Kinder. But this is not red grammar, I would say. Numbers are not really grammar, but they are just unbelievably important, because you might pay €100 too much, go to the wrong hotel room, come 3 hours early. If you misunderstand them, just learn them by heart like a poem. I'm going to read them to you. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So you can see up to here it's quite simple. It's very similar to English, and then after 12 we start just adding what was before and to like 10, so 310 is 13, makes absolute sense. What does not make so much sense is when we go beyond 20, because now we count in a weird order. In German, we don't say 21, we say 1 and 20, 21, 2 and 20, 22, and so on. Okay, I don't have to go through all of them, but that's just the way we count. It's a bit weird. So we have then 30, and then again 31, 32, 33, and so on. 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Then you can say 100, or you can also say 100 if you want to be precise. Only when it's more than one, you have to say 200, 300. And then you just continue. 101 or 101, 143. Yeah, you can see it jumps here. 143, 103 and 40. It's weird, but that's just how we count. 200, and then you have 1000 or 1000. You can say again 1015. You can also say 1015, but it's completely optional. 5130. Let's take a slightly more complicated example here. And then if you want to count that far, you will end up at 1 million, 1 Million. Finally, comparing. Comparing is very easy in German. You just take an adjective and add this ER ending. Hamburg ist kleiner als Berlin. Yeah, smaller than. This then will be als. Kleiner als. Dieses Video ist interessanter als mein Buch. Yeah, the same system, you add the ER and you have the als. There's one thing you cannot do in German, and this is you can not compare with something like more or most. Like in English, you would say it's more interesting. You would say smaller, but more interesting, not interestinger. You cannot do that in German. It would sound very weird, and therefore, yeah, if you do it, I would say from a red grammar perspective, it's fine, but we just don't do it in German. Unfortunately, some of the adjectives are a little bit irregular when they go to the comparing stage. We can add these double dots very often. So we would say lang and then länger, and some are plain irregular, like gut becomes besser. And the same applies to the superlative. The superlative is also very regular, very predictable in German. We would say Warnemünde is smallest, ist am kleinsten. So again, we have this ending sten in this case, and we have this word am, which we don't use in English, but in German, when we want to say this is smallest, this is most interesting, we have to add this am. Dieses Video ist am interessantesten, and we have the irregular ones, am längsten, am besten. However, we don't use this am if we have another word after it. So for example, we would say, dieses Video ist das interessanteste Video. We're not saying video here, but then of course we can drop the but again, if you make a mistake with that, I would not consider it a red grammar mistake. So now that we're at the end of the red grammar, you have no more excuse not to speak German, but you might be asking, okay, but what about the yellow grammar and the green grammar? Should I just ignore them? And my answer is definitely not, but I will explain it to you on an example. German nouns have genders. Every noun has a gender, and there is no sense in the distribution. We say der Tisch, die Tür, das Fenster. It's completely illogical. It doesn't make any sense, and everybody is confused about that, even Germans themselves sometimes. Should you ignore the genders? They're definitely not red grammar, because if you make a mistake with them, I will understand what you say. This is not an issue at all. But in the long run, if you want to learn German fluently, you want to get the gender right at least most of the time, maybe 90%, 95%, something like that. So you cannot just go and start learning German and say, oh, about the genders, I'm going to focus in 2 years. This will not work. You have to learn the gender with every noun from the beginning, but not focus on it when you speak. So that's the difference between red grammar and yellow grammar, green grammar. Yellow grammar and green grammar is there for you to illustrate, is there for you to see how the language functions, what would be correct, but it can be ignored when you're speaking, at least at a lower level. Of course, when you want to become fluent, you want to also be able to express yourself correctly, but at the beginning, at the A1, A2 level, this is really not something that should hold you back. So therefore, every decent German course, also my own German course, will introduce, for example, the concept of grammatical gender early on, or will introduce the concept of Dativ and Akkusativ early on. But if you get that right during speaking, it's not a big deal. And what is more important for you to be well understood and to be able to have a conversation in German is actually the pronunciation. And therefore, I invite you to check out the pronunciation videos on this channel.